And it's Tuesday evening. You're welcome to tonight's edition of Fact Sheet, where we don't mince words, we say it as it is, and we bring out only the facts in our deliberations with the right resource persons, bringing out the tangents that are usually lost out during such important conversations. And as always, the issues we table for conversations are very, very important. And tonight, we are talking about a problem that's bedeviling our nation, which has to do with the power sector. In your home, I'm sure you've been experiencing the intermittent power supply to your home. Some would say the erratic power supply. In your business environment, maybe you are experiencing the same. Across the country, several people are complaining about the erratic power supply that is coming into their homes, into their offices. For some, it may be low voltage. For some, it may be erratic. For some, it would be the absence of power for a couple of hours throughout the day. It's obviously affecting businesses. It's obviously affecting businesses and families as well. That's what we're seeking to unravel tonight in our discussion as we seek to understand the problem with the energy sector. Over the past few weeks, there have been several statements from the ECG, from the GRICO, seeking to explain what the problem, what the challenge has been. Sometimes it has to do with some substation. Sometimes it has to do with some power lines which need working on. Sometimes it has to do with scheduled maintenance which has to happen. Some are saying it has to do with money. And that is as a result of the indebtedness of ECG to GRICO and GRICO to the power producers. That's why we are having this problem in the country. Recently, there have been talks from both the ECG and GRICO telling us there was going to be a planned, release of a timetable for load shedding in the country for the months of April, May, and we don't know when. We are concerned because we never thought a country that is supposed to have excess power would have power outage. So how did we get here? That's the focus of our conversation tonight on Fact Sheet. My name is Samuel Chen, and I welcome you to the discussion. We're going for a short break. When we come back, I'll introduce to you my guests for us to begin the process of trying to understand where the problem actually lies. Stay with us. And you're welcome back. Tonight, my guests are ready for us to try to understand where the problems and the challenges may be coming from when it comes to the power sector and the erratic power situation we are experiencing across the country. If viewers and listeners can recollect, it was a Sunday afternoon when the entire nation went dark. From then, we began experiencing this problem. Tonight, my guests are Theophilus Boadu Adoko. He is a policy lead at ASEP. He'll help me try to understand the situation. So with Mr. Bawa Mukela, who is the head of public relations and external affairs at the PURC. And so with Fritz Moses, who is also a research analyst with IES, also be here to help me understand what the problem is might be coming from. Theophilus and Mr. Munkela will join us via Zoom, and then Fritz would be with me in the studio. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the discussion.
Good evening and thanks for having us.
And since Fritz, you are with me here in the studio, I will pick your thoughts on the situation in the country at the moment and from your point of view, what the problem is.
All right, so thank you once again, Samuel. I think we've all been in this country, we've all been experiencing or seeing what has been happening over the past few months, I should say. But clearly it's not new. I mean, it's something that we've lived it before. And so when the situation started happening, or when we saw the signs, when we saw what was going to happen, experts from IES and of course also other agencies started speaking up that these are things that we need to avoid in order to ensure that we are not put back in the situation that many Ghanaians felt uncomfortable in. And so when those comments or when those arguments started coming up, the central issue had been with the fact that because of our ability as a nation to ramp up our generation of electricity, of power, especially with the installed capacity of about 5,172 megawatts now, up from about 3,700 in 2016. So that was a substantial increment, about 1,700 addition, megawatts of power addition to the installed capacity. And so that was essentially going to cause a lot of stir in the transmission and distribution grid, because When you have increased your supply, then it means that there will be a lot of power flowing in the same lines that exist already. And so, of course, we were expecting that there will be an improvement and a commensurate improvement in the transmission and distribution grid. That didn't happen over the years. But then again, we saw the demand for power also increase over the past 5 years. It was around 1,600, 2015, 2016. Currently, with our engagement with ECG and GridCo, we are told that it hit about 3,300 in April, somewhere in last week. And so that means our generation and our supply and demand are both increasing at a faster pace than we had expected. We know that from 2000 to 2020, the rate of increment in demand was about 4.5. The rate of increment in supply was about 5%. And so there was that need, or there was that expected growth over the past few years.
So help me understand, is it a matter of a lack of expansion? Is it a matter of missed scheduled maintenance? And is it a matter of output being too high? What really is it?
What we know is that the maintenance actually happens in both the GridCo and ECG lines. The kind of maintenance they actually do is the corrective type. They are not able to undertake the proactive maintenance, where you would get to know which faults could happen and solve them even before they happen. What they usually do is they wait for the faults, or they are resources able to allocate for when the faults have happened or the issues have come up, and then they will have to correct all those things. So these are the issues that they're able to handle with. But then again, they, GridCo and ECG themselves also are aware. They are in charge of the transmission grid. The fact that there's a lot of pressure now coming into the grid due to the increased demand and supply, they knew all the issues that could happen. They knew the several inefficiencies that would exist in the system that would cause the nation to experience a major power outage. Of course, we recall the CEO of GridCo saying in 2018 that we were going to experience a major power outages because of the fact that there was a decrease in electricity tariffs. That's a whole new conversation around that, because essentially GridCo didn't have the resources. ECG itself did not also do the same. And so they were relying largely on the tariffs that were coming in to undertake this corrective maintenance that we had been experiencing. But then again, the need for the proactive maintenance that would fish out the necessary adjustment or the necessary upgrades in the system was very resource intensive. I mean, it needed a huge capital to be able to do that. And so that's why most times you hear as call on the government to rather come in and help these agencies, because even though they are cash strapped with several commercial losses and several losses in their distribution and transmission systems, they are not able to go out there themselves and get the adequate financing to finance this project. And so financing has been one of the most important parts that has influenced what you are currently experiencing, because you see that because of the inability to do several years back, the issues have started coming back, and it's hurting us now.
Well, let me try and seek the views of Theophilus as well. I mean, in the same industry as yours, and maybe they may have a different opinion as to what might be the problem. Absolutely. Because from the way you are speaking, it has to do with maintenance issues and the lack of finance to be able to expand. Yeah. Because it's making me think about if it has to do with finance, and we're going through this phase presently, and they still are relying on the collections of revenues from the ECG, where would they have the money to solve the problem which is ahead of us? Exactly. But let me seek the views of Theophilus on this matter. Theophilus, from your point of view, as I said, where do you think the problem is coming from?
Let's say good evening to our viewers. So you know the value chain of our power supply begins with generation, goes through transmission, and then we have the distribution aspect of the chain. So it requires that for the chain to be optimized and for power supply to be enhanced, it requires that all of these sectors in the chain, components in the chain, become effective and that they receive the adequate investment that are needed. So if you recall, between 2012 and 2016, when we're at the peak of power outages, there was some significant investment into enhancing generation. But the distribution aspect has its own problems. But over the years, we see that that investment that needs to go into enhancing the transmission infrastructure has sort of been lacking. So if you refer to the electricity supply plan, 2020 electricity supply plan, it actually mentions the need for some investment in some key infrastructure along, within the transmission network. But as Fraser mentioned, that over the years hasn't really happened. So the transmission network is unable to meet, the supply demands of the increasing population. So if you consider the peak loads, the peak demand from say 2019, which was around 2,900 megawatts thereabouts, and then what we are being told in, I think, a week or two ago, that is the peak demand now, which is around 3,170 something megawatts, you can see that demand has quite increased. But that the commensurate investment in transmission infrastructure hasn't happened. And so there are persistent overloads of the infrastructure. The infrastructure has become weak, which consistently leads to voltage violations, power cuts here and there, which are felt in our homes. So the problem essentially has to do with the lack of investment that goes into the transmission infrastructure, the kind of investment that we saw in generation that is lacking in the transmission infrastructure, which will require, of course, finance and revenue to boost it up. Now, one may ask, where is that financing going to come from if there are all of these challenges? Of course, if you have these problems in your transmission network, in your power generation systems, and then mobilizing revenues is a challenge, it will be difficult for you to get revenues to optimize the systems. So I think one side of the issue is also to make sure that the losses and the revenue losses and then the leakages in the distribution side of the chain are plugged. They are blocked, such that ECG will collect the needed revenues and then sort out the players along the value chain to have that revenues to undertake that significant investment in the transmission infrastructure. I think that basically is a problem.
Now, I'm trying to understand this because the ECG has, I will use Accra for instance, a lot of in Accra are on their prepaid system and not on their postpaid system. And so revenue generation invariably becomes easy. As and when we buy directly, it hits their systems for them to also generate that income for onward payments to the suppliers of the power to them. And so I'm trying to understand how it becomes problematic for the ECG as the wastage and the leakage in the system. But in terms of revenue that comes to ECG, compared to the past where we were on the postpaid system, now they're using prepaid systems, let's say in most of the capital cities or in the metropolis or municipalities. So it shouldn't be a problem in terms of money that they generate, should it?
Unfortunately, it is a problem. As we speak now, ECG, the distribution losses, the losses in the distribution aspect is around 26%, which then goes to say that, the power given to ECG to sell is unable to account for 26% of that power. Now that is significant. 26% is quite significant if you consider how much revenues it could bring in. That aside, contributing to all of these losses, the distribution losses, I remember you mentioned that in the metropolis, a lot of the meters are prepaid meters, but it will surprise you to know that there are a lot of shared meters that are in the system. There are a lot of illegal connections that are in the system that go to affect, how much revenues ECG can collect, because you have a meter that is not captured in ECG system. Obviously, ECG can't, trace those meters and then make the collections. So some of these mishaps in there contribute to ECG's inefficiencies, at collecting some of these revenues. And then you are well aware that there are agents, they are agents of ECG that also sort of help to facilitate the revenue losses at the distribution aspect. Until all of these gaps are plugged, it will be quite difficult to optimize revenue mobilization from the sector. I think that ECG basically needs to be efficient. We saw how much revenues PDS was able to collect when eventually the distribution side was privatized. But we also know the politics that went around it, and then eventually the collapse of the deal. So ECG can enhance its efficiency. I mean, it is possible. It can enhance its efficiency. Efficiencies in the distribution aspect can be enhanced to enhance revenue mobilization. I mean, until that is done, I'm sure it'll be quite difficult to collect revenues and then use that for investment in the value chain.
Now, we can't have this conversation without the involvement of the PURC, because in the end, if the ECG, for instance, decides today that it's going to the PURC for an upward adjustment in terms of the tariffs that consumers pay for the power they consume, it will be up to the determination of the PURC to either accept or not to accept. Over the years, anytime the ECG and the Ghana Water Company Limited has submitted its, tariff adjustment programs to them, there have been instances where there have been some cuts that have been made on them. And so I ask myself, in all this, what does the PURC itself make of the problem presently? Mr. Munkela, what do you make of the problem?
Good evening to your cherished viewers across the globe. The Public Utilities Regulatory Commission, as a regulator in the industry, is very much concerned about the interest of the utility provider as much as the interest of the consuming public. The recent happenings in the power sector is rather very, very unfortunate. Why? Because there are actually system maintenance that the transmission company, that is GRIDCO, is embarking. And then that is calling for some of these outages. And there are also some emergency outages, just like my colleagues mentioned earlier. The demand for power has increased, thereby making the conductors that used to carry power to the various parts of the country becoming obsolete. So there's the need for upgrade in the system that would enhance constant and reliable delivery of power to Ghanaians. So when that happens, sometimes emergency issues would call for outages and all that. So GRIDCO has zoomed in to upgrade some of these lines, some of these substations, and of course, replace some of the conductors that would have to carry the extended power or the demanded power to some parts of the country. My colleague also spoke about revenue mobilization. Talking about these losses, some of the losses actually are being catered for in the tariff that we give to the utility companies. So we have benchmarks in the tariffs that we approve as a commission. And some of the benchmarks includes the allowable losses. So it is only when they go beyond the allowable losses, that is where they suffer in refunding money or in getting funds to cater for their costs in line of production of power. So in the value chain, ECG has to receive money from the consuming public because they have direct contact with the consuming public before the money can trickle down to GRIDCO and that of the generator. So if ECG collections are very poor, because PURC has given ECG 95%, it was actually 95%, but we've realized that with the inputs of prepayment meters and other revenue mobilization strategies like e-commerce and all that, we decided as a commission to say, no, 95% will be too low because the other 5% is imputed into the tariff for you and I to pay. And we said, no, 95% was very low. We are now making it 98% collectibles. So the utility companies, or ECG for that matter, is supposed to retrieve its billed revenue of 98% of what it has billed customers. So when that is retrieved, and we also recommended as a commission that a cash waterfall system be used in distribution of these funds. So when that is done, at least GRIDCO would be able to recover its cost of investment and be able to carry out some of these maintenance that is lagging, and for that matter, causing the recent outages. So from the side of the commission, that is actually what we are viewing the situation. Talking about tariffs, you know, the last major tariff the commission announced was in 2019. And we stated that that particular tariff was for a 2-year period. The PURC has two main tariff regions. We have the major tariff review and we have the automatic adjustment formula. The major tariff review is going through the processes after receiving proposals from the utility companies in coming up with a decision. After we go through all these processes, we project, you know, because the tariffs are futuristic, we make projections as in interest rates, as in CD dollar exchange rate, as in inflation and all that. So when these projections are made, we cannot hold the same tariff for the entire period of time for that particular tariff. So we need to apply what we call the automatic adjustment formula every quarter in order to adjust any changes in the projections that we made. So that is the other regime of tariff, tariff review that the commission does. So currently, we are within a period of a major tariff review because the 2019 tariff was for 2 years and 2021 is the end of the second year of that particular tariff, thereby making 2021 a major tariff review year. So we have actually started a major tariff review and we are yet at the first step in the process. So maybe if time would permit us in the course of the discussion, I'll run viewers through the process when the commission is embarking on a major tariff review.
There's a very important point I need to ask you, which has to do with your role as the regulator, as to whether the issues about plant maintenance, you have oversight responsibilities to ensure that these, you know, distributing lines and staff stations meet standards to ensure there is the flow of power to our homes and our businesses. You have that role.
Yes, the commission has that role because before the commission would approve any tariff, we take into consideration the cost components of the utility providers. And when you are embarking on a maintenance, it involves cost. So all these things are inputted in the process in coming up with a final tariff. However, it is one thing approving a cost to pass through a tariff, and it is another getting the funds to fund that particular maintenance that the utility is supposed to embark on. So if the PURC even goes ahead to approve a particular cost component for the utility provider to be able to carry on its work smoothly and to deliver reliable power, if the consuming public ends up not paying for the power that we consume, you see, like I was telling you, the allowable losses when the utility companies run within the allowable loss, that is one benchmark. And the other benchmark I explained was the collectible. So let's start with the allowable losses. When a utility company runs with share losses, transmission losses, and all that, if they are able to run within that particular losses, then it means they are making, like they are very prudent in their operations. But if they are not able to achieve the benchmark, then it means that is the first point of making losses in the tariff. We have given them a tariff that will cater for all these maintenance. But if they are not able to curtail the losses and they go beyond the benchmark, it stands as a loss there. That is one thing. The other one is the collectibles. Even if they are able to go within or to run within the allowable losses and sell the power on credit to consumers, and they are not able to collect the money that consumers owe them, that is another benchmark that they are breaching. So the collectibles of 98% every month, they are usually not able to hit the 98%. So if ECG takes the money from the consuming public, it has to satisfy the component of the distribution cost in the tariff before it trickles down to the transmitter, before it even gets to the generator. So you see that there will be a shortfall.
What I'm trying to make the question I was asking was, in approving these figures for these providers, they would obviously have submitted to you maybe their planned maintenance, schedule or plan for you to review, so that as regulators, you would have that supervisory role to ensure that, okay, so Greco said that in first quarter, they are going to maintain substation A or substation B in the Ashanti region, so that you ensure that that happens, regardless of the scenario you have, created about the non-payment of the consumers to them, regardless. Is there anything like that?
We monitor after passing a tariff or after announcing a tariff and gazetting it. We go ahead to monitor for the implementation of the funds given to the utility companies, and monitoring maintenance projects is one part of the activities the commission does. Now, when you are going to monitor, I mentioned initially that some of these outages are planned and some are emergency. The emergency ones are the unannounced ones. Those that maybe when a line becomes overloaded. Example, the current producing power some time ago, about a few weeks ago, thereby putting pressure on the lines or the conductors that carries power from down south through Kumasi to the north. So it makes the line so overloaded. And of course, demand also had increased. So it overloaded the lines, making the system trip. And we ended up having a total system collapse. So when you talk about something like this, it is not part of the planned maintenance activities that the utility providers were supposed to embark. So the planned maintenance activities are those that they are aware, and when lines are going to go off as a result of that, they announce to the general public that there's a planned maintenance and that is calling for a power outage in plan A, in area A, B, and C. So we seriously do monitor as a commission.
Let me ask my final question for a break, and when we come back, there are some other issues out raised with Theophilus and Fritz. And this has to do with your role in protecting the interest of we the consumers and then that of the power distributors. Now, I'm asking this, that should the ECG and GRICO by now have put out a timetable as to the load shedding they had earlier indicated that we're going to experience?
Initially, this is a very important question. Initially, the feed we got from GRICO was an emergency outage that plowed the country into a total darkness. An emergency outage, you cannot have a plan or a timetable in that regard. But going forward, we realized that no, the outages were more than the emergency that we had, the emergency explanation that we had from GRICO. So currently, as we speak, the commission has instructed the transmission and the distribution company to come up with a schedule so that the planned maintenance that are yet to be carried out, consumers should be informed far ahead of time for them to make plans if they're going to be power outages or not in their vicinity. So we have actually instructed that a timetable or a schedule be given, so that if they are going to work on maybe a Pokwasi substation, they should inform people, okay, this is the quantum of load that need to be shared within this period of time. So ECG, allocate areas that you feel that this quantum of load can be taken care of in putting them out or in shedding the load. So that is what we have instructed, and hopefully within the week, there should be something like that being published in the media.
I'm grateful, Mr. for the explanation you have given us, because there were a lot of things we needed to clarify in our deliberations tonight, which has to do with the power sector. If you just joined the conversation, this is Fact Sheet live on eTV, also live on Facebook. If you're following conversation on Facebook, you can let us hear your thoughts, your views, and your comments on our wall through your comments you share with us, and we'll gladly read them in the course of our deliberations. Again, you can share the link to different groups and platforms that you belong to, so others may also get the information you are getting tonight as we discuss this matter. First, now, a thought has been running through my mind as to the gravity of the problem we are dealing with as a nation, because I'm trying to picture this. If you look at the supply chain, the power producers produce the power. GRICO carries the power, gives the power to the ECG. The ECG is supposed to sell the power to the consumer. Consumer pays ECG. ECG then gets the money to GRICO, and GRICO in turn pays the power producer. Now, if you look at our energy mix, it is more than 70% thermal now. And so if over the period, the ECG's indebtedness to the distributors, the suppliers of the power, has become problematic, then obviously it means that GRIDCO itself would also be indebted to the power producers themselves. And so we may have a situation where the power producers may one day grind to a halt. Is that a possibility?
I think this is not even a question we should ask, because essentially we had last year, even before the election, somewhere in November, when the IPPs came out saying that if government doesn't pay up about 80% of its debt, then about $1 billion, it would shut down its plants. And we had all the noise that was made about it. Currently, for our checks, we know that as at March, the debt owed to the IPP stands about $880 million, and that's a huge sum of money. And these debts are not, it didn't come about just in a month or a year. It has been accumulating over the period. And of course, GRIDCO would not have that resources to pay up. And ECG will always say that it's the government's duty to pay that debt on its behalf, so that ECG can also collect its resources to undertake the projects they need. Of course, there's the importance of the cash waterfall mechanism system that had been instituted last year. It was too long, it took too long to come. We know it was supposed to start somewhere in 2016, but then likely it got into our hands in 2020. We think some of these issues are what there should be a priority on. The fact that we know what the issues are, we know what the solutions to are, but then the will to address them. For instance, we know that distribution and transmission losses have been rising, and those things, those two losses cost a huge sum of money to the Ghanaian consumer. Of course, it comes down to the consumer at the end of the day, to both ECG and GRIDCO. We know exactly especially for 2019, when we were producing when we transmitted and distributed about 19,000 gigawatts per hour of electricity. Out of that 19,000, about 35% was lost and became cost to both ECG and GRIDCO. And that stands about 4,750 gigawatts per hour of power that was lost. In monetary terms, that's over $600 billion, and that's a lot of money just for 2019. And so, if you have to look at the inefficiencies and how it is costing the cost component, it is costing the various utility providers, that's ECG and GRIDCO, then you get to understand why we are facing the current challenges. And of course, there's the political ignorance, we would like to put it, of our various politicians and agencies and government to undertake the necessary investment. We know it's cost intensive, but then again, they have to look out for the innovative way. We know even also that the current project that's currently going on at the GRIDCO substations and ECG substations are undertaken by foreign entities. And of course, we know our governments cannot be able to undertake those things. So those are the things that we need to be looking at doing. That periodically, or as we go by, we should be looking out for the innovative ways to invest in the sector, especially in the transmission and the distribution grids or lines. That needs the work to be done on them, because we know that going forward again by 2023, our generation would still increase. We are seeing a 5% rise annually since 2000. So by 2023, we are going to see the 5,172 that we are having now, perhaps shoot to about 5,300 to about 5,400, and that's huge. That still means there's a lot more pressure that's coming on the lines. We are seeing these investments or these activities or these upgrades coming in the system. That would add on another pressure if we don't, as a nation or as a people, have that will or that dedication to ensure that we are making the transmission and distribution grid more efficient, because the efficiency would still keep dwindling if you turn a blind eye to it and increase our generation and supply to continues to increase.
Well, I think the most important question we should be asking ourselves tonight is, how do we solve the problem? Because it all boils down to money, money, money. Now, some would say that there are two options available to us as a nation: whether government would intervene by sourcing money for the ECG, or tariff adjustments. So the ECG would make some money to pay GRIDCO, and then GRIDCO onwardly pays the power producers. Now, these two routes that we are talking about, just Monday, the ECG indicated that they were embarking on debt collection, massive debt collection. Yesterday and today, I don't know for how long that's going to travel. But, Theo, let me ask this question. the two options that are available to us as a nation, government intervening in the situation and saying, okay, all right, we're going to look for money to support ECG, Grico, and pay this amount of money so that, you know, they can strengthen their provision and distribution, or tariff adjustments. Which of the options should we be looking at now? All right, your microphone is muted. If you could unmute your mic, would appreciate it.
Let's consider the issues from this perspective. Somewhere in 2015, the ESLA was introduced to address some of these issues with the debt. That then goes to affect how much revenues are available for, you know, optimizing investment in infrastructure. Now, because over the years, through the ESLA, we were unable to collect enough to sort out the debt, government decided to use the ESLA as a sort of a security to get some bonds, access some funds to sort out some of the debt. Unfortunately, when the monies came, I think that there were a lot of debt to the banks that had the potential of leading to the collapse of those banks. So a chunk of the money went into, you know, servicing those debt. Now, along the line, the cash waterfall mechanism has also come in. It has come in, and that essentially looks at distributing the revenues that are collected, you know, along who is owed most along the chain to clear some of the debt. Now, if you consider the debt that had been cleared, I think as of 2016, it stood around $2.7 billion. In 2018, mid-2018, about $1.4 billion of that was cleared. But after clearing that bit of the debt, for 2 years, more of what has been cleared came to add up. So as of 2017-2018, the debt had now increased to about $2.7 billion. So if you consider the whole debt cycle, it looks like we take one step forward and then we take 2 steps back. Now, the options that you have presented, whether government goes for money to sort out the debt, or we get tariffs to sort out some of these issues and then optimize the investment in the value chain. I think that if we are looking, the government approach is really not sustainable. I don't think that is sustainable. The business as usual case, I think increasing tariffs will be the best option to go. That is, if we are going by the business as usual scenario, you get it. But you consider the fact that, you know, even when we increase tariffs, the losses, the increasing losses in the distribution chain is going to sort of render the tariff increases moot. It will essentially be ineffective in addressing the issues. And I say this because if you look at the regulatory benchmark for distribution losses, as of 2017, the allowable losses was around 21% for distribution losses. Now, between, I think for 2019-2020, the review, this was increased to 22.6. It gives the sense that the PURC is not cracking down on the limits that are allowed for losses. If you want to address the power losses in the chain, you should rather be concerned about beating down the allowable thresholds and not rather increasing it. But even as I say that now it has been increased to 22.6, ECG is still unable to meet that threshold. So then it comes back to looking at the more viable option to sort out some of these, clear this debt, and then sort out the investment that are needed to optimize infrastructure. Now, it means that ECG must necessarily cut down on the losses. ECG must necessarily cut down the losses, or we look at ways of privatizing ECG in a more transparent manner, because we've seen, the few months that PDS operated, how efficient they were in mobilizing revenues. The problem with PDS was that it was sort of shrouded in secrecy. It had all of its problems, and then it ended the way it ended. So if we are looking at clearing the debt, optimizing investment in the infrastructure in the chain, then I think that privatizing ECG to get the losses addressed, or if ECG will enhance its own efficiencies to address the losses, that should be the focus.
All right, Theophilus, I am grateful. We will go for a short commercial. When I come, I would ask the question you asked. I'll put it to Mr. Munkela about they cracking the whip in terms of the efficiency of these power distributors, and then the way forward as to how long this situation we are in as a nation, how long you as the experts in the field expect this to travel. Is it a May, June, July matter, or is a whole year matter we are looking at per your projections and the information you may have by proxy? We'll be right back. And you're welcome back. This is Fact Sheet live on eTV. If you're just joining us, just catching the tail end of the conversation. But still, there's a lot more to talk about before we end the show at exactly 9 and hand you over to Mercy B and the team to also bring you a very, very interesting conversation. So first, I was asking the question before we went for that commercial break as to how long, from your point of view, with all that we are hearing from ECG, GWICO, government and all, how long do you foresee this traveling?
All right, so I like that you said with all that we are hearing from GWICO and ECG, because for us, we can only speak to what they have given us, the information they've given us now. We know that for the Kumasi, Kumasi project, we are hearing that it's about 90, the Bokwase substation rather, it's about 98% complete, and they are looking at bringing it on stream by the end of May next month. And so we are hoping that by then that should be completed. For the other projects, the projections are that by July and the latest being up to September. So we are hoping that with what they've told us currently and the timelines that they've given us, they will follow that accurately. And so we should see, we think that it will stretch the end of the year. I mean, we know how these projects end up transversing over that period of time that you even set for yourself. So we are thinking that going forward, we should look at these things. It would minimize as we go along, but then we will see the fullest operation of the new systems by the end of the year, hopefully, getting into next year, we think.
Well, let me ask Theophilus as well for his projection as to whether we're going to live with this, intermittent, erratic power supply to our homes the next 6 months, or whether it's going to end at the end of the year. Theophilus, what do you think?
I think that following the various conversations, the conversations that have come out, there are timelines that have been given in July, there are timelines that have been given in September. But I think that, to have a clearer picture of how long this will travel, it demands that the players within the chain, ECG and then GWICO, come together and then give us some sort of plan to give a sense of how long this is going to travel. But the way the systems work with some of these maintenance and then infrastructure and all of those, maybe by the end of the year, max, we are hoping that this gets resolved.
All right, Theophilus, I think for your view. The final question will go to Mr. Munkela for the issue Theophilus raised about, the sanctions, the punitive measures that they have to apply to ensure compliance on the part of ECG so that, we will not find ourselves where we are. Can sanctions be taken against, these power distributors? Mr. Munkela, why haven't you taken action?
All right, thank you very much. This is a very, very relevant question. Before I go ahead to explain, let me re-echo the fact that as much as the PURC care for the interests of the consumer, we equally care for the interests of the utility service provider. And I also mentioned earlier that the tariffs that PURC give to the utility providers are punitive in nature, and of course, they are beneficiary on the other side. Punitive in the sense that if the losses or the benchmarks that we've given them, they are not able to meet those benchmarks. That is the punitive nature of it. And they are supposed to actually go ahead with the infrastructure improvement, with the system maintenance that was featured in the tariff proposals that they submitted before a particular tariff is approved. So when that is done, and we as a commission do our investigations, and we realize that at the end of the day, it is the fault of a particular player in the value chain, we sanction. So we equally do that. And then my colleague also spoke about the losses. These losses, like I mentioned earlier, we have some allowable losses. So if the system operates within those allowable losses, then they cannot complain of making a loss because the consuming public pays for that. And I really want to also use this opportunity to re-echo that as much as we consumers are insisting for reliable power, as much as we have the right for a reliable power, we equally have responsibilities. And the responsibilities is to consistently pay for the power that we consume. And of course, to desist from power theft. So these things would make the utility companies not be able to meet the benchmarks that we give them in terms of commercial losses. Because if there are a lot of power thefts that are going on in the system, people are bypassing meters, people are finding ways of consuming power without passing through the measuring mechanism, then it means that that power is not accounted for.
For the final submission for this evening, and I'd like to thank my guests who joined me via Zoom. Theophilus Bodu Adoko, who is a policy lead at ASAP, Mr. Bao Munkela, who is the head of public relations and external affairs at the PURC, and then Fritz Moses, who is a research analyst with IES, for joining us for us to have this meaningful conversation. Gentlemen, I am grateful once again. On that note, I thank you viewers for being a part of our discussions tonight. God willing, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. there will be a repeat broadcast of this conversation on eTV. Good night.